Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Pam Casemeyer here on behalf of not just MedChi, but the Academy of Pediatrics and the Federally Qualified Health Centers and other provider groups. And these hearings are very challenging, and we are trying to talk through all of this. And maybe I could raise a few issues that concern us, not because we're here to argue that the current test is accurate or not accurate or all those kinds of things. I mean, I think there's some, I'm not a clinician. You could probably debate that a lot. There's other things you can debate. But more so when you're setting up a structure around a notice, some things that really make a difference in terms of long-term effectiveness and not providing inaccurate or misleading information. Because what is current today may or may not be current for a long period of time or could change very quickly. Is a very challenging area, a very challenging disease. Infectious diseases in general are challenging because strains vary, treatments that were effective don't stay effective, and all of those things are concerning. I will tell you there's also concern about this notion that it's better to just start treating no matter what because the test is bad. I don't need to tell you, well, at least maybe the chairman, long-term antibiotics is not an inconsequential thing. There's a lot of concern about antibiotic resistance. So just presuming it's okay because someone might have a disease to start a course of long-term antibiotics. I mean, you've got public health people arguing about whether animals should have disease prevention antibiotics. Well, we need to be cautious and make sure the information is good and accurate. So part of what we're talking about with them around this is how do you make sure if you're providing a notice that the notice is accurate. I'm not even here to argue whether the current language is accurate, but once you put it in statute and once it's there, it has a message that doesn't change till you all change it unless you provide some alternative mechanism. So for instance, the proponents referenced the dense breast law you passed 2 or 3 years ago. And I actually have the law here, and it was a debate about whether your mammogram test should include a notice that if your mammogram says your breasts are dense, it could potentially, you could have a higher cancer rate. That, you all passed that legislation, but there's some really important language in there that's not in here. Things like, probably the most critical language is that if the department finds, this is what says what you did before, significant differences between the content of the notice that is required to be provided, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and current medical evidence on, and you would say Lyme disease, the department may adopt regulations that change the content of the notice. If the disease never becomes, the tests never become good, the notice never changes. But if the testing issues change, you could then have the department say clinical evidence is different and it's okay to go in and adjust the notice to meet current clinical evidence. That was something that was very important to the passage of that bill. And that's part of what we're talking about, making sure you have those issues in there because you don't want to misinform people now. You don't want them to be not informed, but you don't want the information to change and them to get bad information. The other thing I would say is taking the immunity issues out of the bill is a bit problematic. It's not so much that there's a worry about if you give the form, there's some lawsuit necessarily. In the dense breast legislation, you had a phrase that said that giving the form doesn't create a standard of care, obligation, or duty that provides for a cause of action. Because I can tell you, if for some reason you give the notice and someone starts to argue that the notice is inaccurate or they took some decision, maybe they start a long-term course of action of antibiotics and they have some negative implications because they did that, and they said, well, I started treatment right away because of this notice. Those things are not inconsequential, and I'm not sure why there's any objection to having some of that kind of language in the law because it's what you did for the dense breast notification. And so those are the language issues we're talking about, so that when the notice is issued, it is issued appropriately. And who issues it? I think there's a discussion about at the time the test is ordered, or at the time your blood is drawn, or in the dense breast legislation, it came on your lab form with your test results, because it also advised you to have a discussion with your provider and all of those kinds of things. So those are sort of the parameters that we're talking about with respect to the bill language.
Chairman Middleton, Vice Chairman Assel, members of the committee, I'm David Diggs. I'm the president of the Maryland Association for Justice, the trial lawyers. We're dedicated to protecting the rights of the injured and securing their access to the civil justice system. I'm also an attorney with 30 years of practice behind me representing injured folks. And it's a little odd for MedChi and MAJ to be sitting at the same table. That might tell you there's some problems with. Yes, sir. First of all, there are two parts of this bill, obvious. There's a well-intentioned but ultimately flawed notice provision. And I was very pleased to hear Mr. Jen say they're going to withdraw the immunity provision, but I'm here to put a stake through the heart of the immunity provision. I'm sorry. First of all, the notice provision might be proper notice now. I don't understand all the science, and I was quite moved by Brandon's story and Ms. Green's story. My own wife suffered from Lyme disease. Fortunately, she had an early diagnosis, but she was out of commission for about a year, and she still has flare-ups that give her flu-like symptoms for weeks at a time. And that's been 16 years ago that she first contracted Lyme's. But science can change. This notice might be good now, but with a tweak, I think we could make it work. But the standard of care changes, and doctors need to be up to speed on those changes. So the real important thing is this notice is part of the story, but the rest of the notice needs to be, and you might need to take prophylactic antibiotics in the event of a false negative to make sure you don't contract this terrible disease. To the immunity provision, again, I won't spend a whole lot of time on it given what the proponents have acknowledged, but it has the potential to immunize a doctor who doesn't keep up with science. It has the potential, a doctor could give this notice, there could be a false positive, but he's seen lots of false positives, so we're not going to worry about it. I'm sure you don't have Lyme's disease. Well, he's given the notice, he's therefore immune from liability, and my 1,200 members, the trial lawyers, fight for justice for people like Brandon and Ms. Green, and again, we're opposed to the immunity provision. So the notice is incomplete. It fails to protect. The immunity provision, I hear, is on its way out, and that's good news. As it exists now, we're urging a no vote on this bill.
Alrighty. Pam, can you give us some idea of where the House is? Are they taking this issue up?
It was in subcommittee this afternoon, and we debated this at subcommittee, and they sent us off in a room to see if we could figure out if we could work out the language, and that's where all this discussion that I sort of outlined in my testimony was, and Mr. Jen made reference to. The subcommittee's supposed to be meeting again tomorrow morning, and I think what we'll do is brief them on what we agree on and what we don't agree on, and then the subcommittee will make a decision as to which version or not they take.
Okay, and that's